You know, from the simplest blink of an eye to a full-out sprint, our bodies are always on the move. It's something we do every single second, usually without even thinking about it. But behind these everyday actions is this incredibly complex and honestly beautiful biological machine. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and take a look at the machinery of movement.
Seriously, just think about that for a second. What actually happens when you decide to lift a glass? A thought, just a thought, becomes a physical action. How does that signal travel all the way from your brain, and what kind of amazing cascade of events does it set off to make your arm actually move? That's the mystery we are unpacking today.
So here's our roadmap for putting this incredible puzzle together. We're going to start with the spark, what gets it all going. Then we'll meet your body's engines that provide the power. From there, we'll zoom way in to see the microscopic muscle blueprint and watch the incredible sliding filament dance happen at a molecular level. Then we'll zoom back out to see the skeleton framework it all depends on, and finally take a look at what happens when the machinery fails.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Where does that initial spark come from? Well, before we can even answer that, we need to get our vocabulary straight. We tend to use the words movement and locomotion like they're the same thing, but in biology, they mean very different things.
So, here's the deal. Movement is basically any change in your body's position, like nodding your head, tapping your fingers on a desk, that kind of thing. Locomotion, on the other hand, is a very specific type of movement that actually gets you from point A to point B. Walking, running, you get the idea. It's a simple but really important rule to remember. All locomotion is movement, but not all movement is locomotion.
All right, so what's actually powering all this activity? Well, the engines, of course, and inside our bodies, those engines are our muscles. These things make up a whopping 40 to 50% of our total body weight. They're these highly specialized tissues that do one incredible thing. They turn chemical energy into pure physical force.
And we've basically got three main types. First, you've got skeletal muscles. These are the ones we control on purpose, for walking, lifting, all that stuff. Then you've got smooth muscles, which work behind the scenes in our organs, like our stomach and intestines. And finally, there's cardiac muscle. This is the super specialized, tireless muscle that just keeps our heart pumping, day in and day out.
And if we look a little closer, you can see some really key differences in how they're controlled, voluntarily versus involuntarily, and what they look like under a microscope. Striated, which means striped, versus non-striated. Now, while every single one of these is fascinating, for the rest of our journey today, we're going to focus on the one that's responsible for getting us from place to place, skeletal muscle.
All right, so let's unroll the blueprint. To really get how skeletal muscle creates force, we need to zoom in. Way in, and start peeling back the layers one by one. So, a whole muscle, like your bicep, is really just a bundle of smaller bundles, which are called fascicles. And each of those fascicles is a bundle of even smaller things, individual muscle fibers. Now, this is the key part. Each one of those muscle fibers is actually a single, really long cell with multiple nuclei. So a muscle isn't just some lump of tissue, it's this incredibly organized, nested structure. It's like Russian nesting dolls, but for movement.
Let's keep zooming. Inside every single one of those muscle fibers are thousands of even smaller parallel threads called myofibrils. And if you look really close at a myofibril, you see this repeating pattern of dark and light bands. The region from one dark line to the next is called a sarcomere. And this right here, this tiny little sarcomere, this is the fundamental machine. This is the microscopic engine that drives every single muscle contraction.
So what makes up this tiny engine? Well, it's basically two types of protein filaments. We've got the thin ones, which are made of a protein called actin, and then we have the thick ones made of a protein called myosin. This precise overlapping arrangement of these two proteins is actually what gives muscles that striped or striated look we mentioned earlier, and it's the way they interact that creates all the force. These two are the stars of the show.
All right, so we've met our main characters, actin and myosin. Now it's time for the main event, the molecular dance they perform to make our muscles contract. This whole process is explained by what's called the sliding filament theory, and let me tell you, it is an absolutely beautiful piece of biological engineering.
It all happens in 4 key steps. First, a signal from a nerve arrives, and that triggers a flood of calcium ions inside the muscle fiber. Now, this calcium acts like a key, unlocking binding sites on that thin actin filament. With those sites now open for business, the myosin heads, which are like tiny energized oars, can latch on. And that's step 3, the cross-bridge pull. The myosin head pivots and pulls the actin filament inward, just like a rower pulling an oar through water. Finally, a new energy molecule, ATP, shows up. This causes the myosin head to let go, reset, and get ready for the next pull. This whole cycle repeats thousands of times a second, making the entire muscle shorten and contract.
And this is so important because it shows the crucial role of ATP. See, it's not just for the contraction, it's also absolutely required for the relaxation. ATP provides the energy for that power stroke, sure, but it's also what's needed for the myosin to detach from the actin. Without more ATP, those myosin heads would stay locked onto the actin, leaving the muscle stuck in a contracted state, which is exactly what happens in rigor mortis after death.
So, we've explored the engine, the muscle, and its amazing microscopic machinery. But what good is an engine without a chassis to mount it on, and levers to transfer its force, right? So it's time to zoom back out and look at the structural framework of our body, the skeletal system.
The adult human skeleton is just an engineering marvel. It's this strong, yet surprisingly lightweight framework made up of 206 distinct bones. This whole system provides structure, it protects our vital organs, and of course, it provides the anchor points for the very muscles we just finished talking about.
And those 206 bones are organized with just incredible precision. Now, a full chart like this looks complicated, I know, but it all really boils down to two main groups. You've got the axial skeleton, which forms the central core, so your skull, your spine, and your ribs, and then you have the appendicular skeleton, which is basically everything attached to that core, your arms, your legs, and the shoulder and pelvic girdles that connect them.
Okay, but bones are rigid, so how do we move? That's where joints come in. They're the points where bones meet. There are three main kinds. You have fibrous joints, like in our skull, which are fused together and don't move at all. Then there are cartilaginous joints, like the ones between our vertebrae, that allow for a little bit of movement. But the real stars of locomotion are the synovial joints. Think your shoulder or your knee, which have this fluid-filled cavity that allows for a huge range of free movement. Okay, now that we've built this incredibly intricate machine from the molecules all the way up, we can get a much better idea of what happens when parts of it go wrong. So let's take a look at a few disorders that affect this amazing system.
Because really, when you understand how the system is supposed to work, from that first nerve signal all the way to the joint bending, you can pinpoint exactly where things might break down. Let's check out a couple of examples. Hey, remember that very first step in muscle contraction we talked about, the signal from the nerve? Well, myasthenia gravis is an autoimmune disorder that attacks exactly that point, the neuromuscular junction. The body's own immune system actually blocks or destroys the receptors for the nerve signal. So even though the muscle itself might be perfectly healthy, the command to contract just doesn't get through properly. And that leads to this profound weakness and fatigue.
And what about the joints, our body's levers? Well, in a condition called gout, high levels of uric acid in the blood can lead to the formation of these sharp, needle-like crystals that get deposited right in those synovial joints. This physically chews up the cartilage and causes intense inflammation and pain, severely compromising the smooth movement that joint was designed for. You know, when you think about it, from a single thought to a cascade of nerve signals, calcium ions, and that intricate dance of actin and myosin, all culminating in the movement of bones around a joint, it's a symphony happening trillions of times over, inside you right this second. So maybe the next time you reach for that glass of water, you'll appreciate the incredible biological machinery that makes it all possible. So what will you do with your next move?